Thank you very much. It was impressive moving and talking by Philip. I'm afraid I'm going to stick to British stereotype and stay, firmly behind the podium right now. You might tempt me out later. Do you ever have one of those days when you're going into work and you spot something in the paper or online and it catches your eye? You get into work and somebody mentions the same, and during your breaks, of course, you're checking Facebook and you see, hold on, two unconnected people that are not in the same social groups have posted about the same thing. And you see it on Twitter. And then you get home and your partner mentions the same thing and you think, hold on a second, something's happened here. Whether it's the IKEA monkey or a politician's gaffe, sometimes those things just go everywhere straight away. And it can feel like that. And sometimes it's controlled, and sometimes it's uncontrolled. I want to talk around, hopefully, the controlled version, or I probably ought to say managed, because let's be honest, nothing is totally controlled these days. I will try and get this to work. I'm working. So I'm going to talk around fighting for attention and how to make a campaign feel like it's everywhere. And I want to answer three main questions today. I want to answer, why do we need attention? Why do our campaigns, do they need that to success? Whose attention? I think this is really important. Whose attention are we fighting for? And how exactly do we get it? That's obviously the meat of what we're trying to get to. So we want to get the right attention for our campaigns because ultimately that is what's going to make them successful. We might need to put our issue on the agenda. It might not be there at all. We might need to push it up the agenda, it might be further down, or we might need to recast it entirely because it might be there but not in the right way that we want it to be there. We then need to create the right atmosphere, should we say, to create the pressure in order to get those people to act. I've seen so much attention going into campaigns, creating them on the drawing board, beautiful products that have been created, and very little's often focus on actually the distribution and getting it out in front of those people. And whilst beautiful things can help you campaigning, they're certainly not going to make them successful in the long term. So you need to know before you start what exactly you're trying to achieve and who has the ability to do that. That sounds straightforward, and I know in a room full of campaigners, I don't want you to suck eggs, but at the same time, you'd be shocked at how many campaigns fall down at that first hurdle. Like, what exactly are you trying to achieve, and who has the authority to do that? So first of all, we need to focus on whose attention we're looking for. Really specifically, who is the person that can deliver that change for you? And we also need, who's the key decision maker? Is it a decision maker? Is it a minister? Is it a civil servant? Is it a CEO? Who's exactly the right person? The more specific you can be about that, the better your approach can be because it can be more targeted. And you want to look at those people individually, and then secondly, you want to map around them. Who are their influencers? Because they want to be on your list as well, not just the person. And then perception is reality. Let's be honest. What you think is happening when you're out there, that's what's happening to you. So you need to make sure that to the people that are going around, that there is their reality. And what they see going on, they will take as reality. You need to make sure that different groups and different demographics are showing interest, ideally the ones that they care about. So it's great to have young people on board or older people on board, but try and mix it up a bit, faith groups, academic groups, think tanks, the list goes on. But essentially, the more variety and the more unexpected the partnership, the better. So, how do we get attention? Well, we've all seen banner drops. In fact, I don't know whether there's a laser, but the one at the top is just outside the hotel around the corner. We noticed on the way in. So I thought we'd just do a quick shot of that. But we all know, we've seen banner drops. We've seen naked celebrities. We've seen silly faces, protests. But what are the core components of a really successful campaign. I've been involved in campaigns for all of my professional life for over a decade, from inside government, outside government, from grassroots to on the street to the G8 and the UN, from sort of insider NGO to outsider NGO. And I think I've sort of distilled it down to 6 key principles, and that's what I want to share with you. I think it's about these 6 things. First of all, message discipline. It's really key. Secondly, coordination, personalization, unexpected messengers, thinking creatively, and what I call riding the wave. So many campaigns struggle because either the organization or the messaging is unclear. How many times have you tried to describe a campaign that somebody's asked you to help with, and you've struggled, and you're trying to say it in a different way, and you're trying to say it, and then it just doesn't quite, roll off the tongue. You need something that rolls off the tongue. I was trying to speak to somebody, and I'm not sure this translates, but what we would say in Britain is it does what it says on the tin. It's exactly what it is marketed at, it's up front. Some of the most successful campaigns make poverty history. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, memorable. And they were very clear about their messaging, and they were consistent. So everywhere it was, the campaign was consistent. A campaign in the UK at the moment, we have one newspaper run by Rupert Murdoch, which has naked ladies on page 3 every single day. And the feminist movement in the UK has decided that in 2014, actually having naked ladies every day is not the way they want to be personified. So there is a campaign called No More Page 3. It's gone everywhere. It's on every, people have got T-shirts, No More Page 3. And it's pretty obvious, does what it says on the tin. And don't think, because you're getting bored of it, people are too, because as Peter Mandelson, who some of you may know was the former EU Trade Commissioner, but to us Brits was the architect of the New Labour project and is known as a master of communications, said when you're saying it for the 100th time, they're hearing it for the first time. When you're about to hit your head against a brick wall because you're so bored, some people are just about starting to hear it. So don't forget that. And the more simple and effective your ask, it's not only going to be around making sure that you're getting your message across in the media, it's also that you hold people to account, because if the campaign is succinct, then you can make sure that leaders are holding them to account. Secondly, coordination. Coordination and multiple level campaigning has always been important, and Philip touched a bit on this, of pulling together the online and the offline, but I think there's really new opportunities in that, and those opportunities are being developed right now and tested out. And I wanted to just share with you a couple of examples that I've been pretty impressed with recently. One was around Greenpeace. Greenpeace scaled the Shard in the UK. The Shard, some of you may know, is the tallest building in Europe, based in London. And although it was based in London, round the corner from our offices, I heard about it first from my Brussels colleagues and my colleagues in Berlin, because they use the social media so effectively. So here, as you can see, there were 6 ladies scaling that building. A bit crazy, but I think you probably have to be a bit crazy to be a Greenpeace activist. And Greenpeace, what they did was, in the morning of the campaign, they insidered their supporters. So their supporters were not only watching the stunt unveil and feeling part of that stunt, but they were acting as a microphone for them and amplifying the messages all over the world. So it was a real-time campaign stunt, and it worked absolutely fantastically. The other one, and Philip mentioned, is around UK political parties. And it's interesting because the UK political parties are starting to test out, and we're seeing things that go well and things that don't go quite so well as they test out some of the different methods. I'll start off telling you one that didn't go quite so well. Nick Clegg, who is the leader of our Liberal Democrats, a smaller coalition party in the UK, he made a big promise when we went to the election that he would not put up tuition fees. Absolutely no way. Then when he got into government, he put up tuition fees. And it became a real sort of turning issue. And I still think at the next election, it probably will be the issue that will be his downfall. He decided to go to social media and make a video to apologise. And he started to say, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, very quickly, someone re-edited that into a song. So it was him saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I'm afraid that actually, what was intended as a good social media moment didn't go quite so well. And it still keeps coming up. And, people see him and think of his, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I haven't got that to show you, but you can look at it online later. One thing that is working quite well is the Labour Party, the left of centre party, has started to do these sort of campaigning days, and they set a day, and they set an issue, and they set a hashtag. Now, one of the recent ones was cost of Cameron. So their hashtag was the cost of Cameron, and that was the central element of their campaign. They get all the people out on the streets. They've got a lot more local activists than most of the other parties. So they get them out on the streets. They're getting people handing out flyers and saying cost of Cameron. But at the same time, they are tweeting this constantly. And so it creates a real effect that something is going on, even if it might only be a sort of handful of groups. It creates that sense of momentum. And not only is that good in terms of getting your message out, it's also a great morale booster, because if you're going out and then you see somebody else doing it at the other side of the country, somebody else, you feel part of something bigger. So I have to say, I think it's a good move. Next is personalisation. Personalisation, I think, is important on two fronts. One is around personalising it towards those all-important targets. And then secondly, you can personalise towards the people you're trying to recruit. If you're trying to recruit people to your campaign, that's another way of doing it. So firstly, talking about those all-important targets, I suggest you think about what happens in their day. Do you know? Do they walk to work? Do they drive to work? If they take public transport, is there any way of putting an advert, in a noticeable place with their name on it? Could you get somebody to greet them at work? Hello, here's your thing. What do they care about, and what's their way into the issue? When I was working on climate change, I had to sell the message of climate change to all three of the main UK political parties. But I did that completely differently. If I was on a phone call to a Conservative, I'd be talking around the business opportunities and conservation of our countryside. If I was talking to a Labour politician, I would be talking about the social justice element and the fuel poverty element and the impact that it was having on the poorest people in the world. If I was talking to the Liberal Democrats, I'd just talk about green. So it's straightforward. And it's the same with international development. The One campaign, which is where I work now, had a great story where the US wing of Jubilee 2000 hit on the idea of persuading the Nigerian president, a Baptist, to write a letter to the Baptist churches across southern US states explaining the biblical principles behind debt cancellation. Suddenly, we found we had a swathe of strongly Christian Republicans compelled by this biblical theme. So Bono went to see people like Jesse Helms, who was a Republican senator who'd been very tough on the concept of foreign aid and very bleak on AIDS. He's a religious man, so Bono went to speak to him and told him that over 2,000 verses of scripture pertain to the poor. And Jesus speaks of judgment only once, and it's not about being gay or sexual morality, but it's about poverty. He quoted that verse of Matthew, chapter 25, I was naked and you clothed me. And Jesse was really moved. He was actually in tears. And later he publicly acknowledged that he was ashamed. Sometimes people will be inspired by your campaign straight away, but sometimes you need to tailor your specific message to where they're at, so it's going to resonate with them most effectively, and you need to lead them on a journey. It could also just be a more memorable way of handing something in. On this slide, we're handing in to one of our ministers who was on a show called Strictly Come Dancing. It's a bit random that we have ministers that were on celebrity shows, but anyway, we do, I'm afraid. And so this was relating to the show he'd been on. I think, actually people like it when you've taken the time to think about what they're interested in and apply that. Ultimately, most politicians have got egos, and playing to that's not necessarily a bad thing. And personalisation, as I said, can work well in terms of recruiting people and campaigners. One of my colleagues got this, you probably can't see it so well, but it's a direct message from the elders. I'm sure most of you know, but the elders is a group of older statespeople, including Desmond Tutu, Mary Robinson, Richard Branson, who've come together as a sort of elder statesmen and to give views on things, and they have this group. He followed them on Twitter, and they followed him back and sent him a direct message saying, thank you for joining. But he was really chuffed that they had done that. And, he felt quite empowered by it. So, next one is around unexpected messengers. Never underestimate the impact of different messengers. People respect different organizations, different individuals, and institutions. So naturally, messages coming from them are going to be more respected, better received. I've worked on climate change for over 8 years before I moved into international development. And for those who work on climate change in the room, you'll know that unfortunately we've been discussing the impact of a 4-degree world for quite a long time now. I think it was last year the World Bank put out a report saying we're going to have the impacts of a 4-degree world. And I saw shockwaves going through the international development community going, oh my word, what's this going to mean? And I was like, it's not great, but we've been discussing this for quite a long time. And then it clicked. Because the World Bank had said it, they'd started to listen. And it just reminded me that actually you cannot forget that your messengers, who is saying that message, is as important often as the message. Think outside of the box. So one campaign I did, I worked with a presenter from Top Gear, which is a primetime petrol-headed motor show, and I worked with him on an environmental proposition. And to be fair, people were like, hold on a second. But it raises their eyebrows, it gets them to think about it. So who might be unexpected? Who might get the media for you? Who might the decision makers listen to? Who are they interested in? And how can you shake things up? The next thing I want to talk about is thinking creatively. This is the fun bit. So once you know your target and you know your messaging and you've got all the right bits of the jigsaw in place, this is when the fun starts. And you can start to think really creatively about how to implement your message. And I just want to share a couple of my favorite campaigns that I've heard of recently. One is this from the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. Sounds very formal, very British. And it's a UK-based charity. They go out and save people on the coastline when we're having problems. The problem they had was all of their supporters were old. In fact, in terms of a brand, they were the least well-known charity among the youth demographic in the whole country, so facing a bit of a crisis. So their aim was to raise awareness within the youth sector. They came up with this idea that they wanted the youth to rewrite the headlines of what was going on at the moment. So the youth were particularly annoyed that all the headlines about youth was negative. And so they thought, let's try and get them involved in a topic they're interested in. And the way they did it was they found the top 12 bloggers and they started to send them packages. Now, the twist in it was that they didn't say who they were, so they started to send them anonymously. And they found these bloggers, whether it was at a class that they'd sort of mentioned online in one of their blogs, or they sent it to a rehearsal that we're going to, but they sent them these packages to get involved. And they managed to pique their curiosity and their interest. And these bloggers started to talk about who was sending these mystery packages. And it started to create a real buzz around what was going on. And the campaign really took off. When the bloggers found out that it was the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, they were actually really impressed that they'd managed to do this. And they went down to their training centre and they got really involved. The RNLI worked with YouTube, and actually for the cost of 12 parcels, and quite a bit of creativity, but just 12 parcels, they actually became the #1 viewed YouTube post in UK, France, Switzerland, Russia, Canada, and Australia. And they had 11% of 15 to 19-year-olds in the UK knowing about their campaign. So that's pretty impressive by my mind. The next one I want to tell you about, it's not really a full campaign, it's more of an action, but I just think it's kind of cool, so I wanted to share it with you. So members, it was around the G8 in the US, and we wanted our members at the One campaign to get involved. So we asked them to send in their tweets for leaders, and then we literally printed them on the road towards the G8. So when the leaders were going down, they were driving over the message of the people. Anyway, I just thought it was kind of cool, but thinking outside the box. Another campaign that we ran, and actually there's a great video, but I thought it was maybe a bit too technologically advanced, but if you have a chance to have a look, then do. This was a campaign that One ran last summer. It was around the G8. There's a bit of a theme there. We tend to work quite a lot around the G8. And we knew the government needed a bit of pressure, and we were trying to think of ways to do this creatively. So we used the concept of protest, and we used symbolically protest songs. So we did a few things. We went to various different artists and said, would they re-record, would they perform a protest song, and use that symbolically to explain that protests had made progress throughout the history of time. We worked with YouTube and Spotify to distribute that throughout the world. And in London, we did a pop-up concert. And we did that pop-up concert, and so nobody knew it was happening, but if you were lucky enough to be walking past the South Bank, then you might see Jessie J or Tom Jones performing a protest song. So that was kind of cool. We then recorded some of the original tracks and presented them to Barroso, Hollande, Cameron. So it was linking the whole thing back and making sure that, although it was a kind of cool, fun thing, the politicians knew it was going on and they actually had some sort of memorable thing. The one thing actually we learned from that campaign was we thought we'd have a 6-week campaign just before the GA, a massive buzz, loads of traffic, and then it would die off. That didn't happen. And I have to say, we were a bit worried because we didn't get great traffic at the beginning, but it's built and built and built over time. And we're still getting that traffic now. So we're still getting huge amounts of hits every day from this campaign. And it was a really interesting learning for us in terms of, how to make sure you think about the momentum and what you might get, what you might not. Finally, I just want to mention the Big Ask campaign. This is, I have to confess, is my baby. This is a campaign that I launched at Friends of the Earth, asking for a climate change bill. We wanted for the first time to introduce a law for a carbon budget to limit the amount of carbon that the whole of the UK emitted from now until 2050. We launched the campaign. Everyone said, that's impossible. It's too radical. It's never be done. And the UK government said, well, if you get 100 MPs, that's about just over 600 MPs, to support you, we'll start to listen. So we launched the campaign with Tom York of Radiohead. He very kindly did a concert for us. And we got 100 MPs. And the government said, oh, you better get 200, because to be honest, we've got quite a lot going on. So we got 200. Then at 200, they said, no, 300 will definitely do something. So we did manage to get 412 MPs to sign up, which made it the 4th most supported motion in parliamentary history. And that, to be honest, was just because, to my mind, it was a great argument, it was very specific, and we worked at all different levels. We worked at a local level, constituency-wise, we worked at a national level, and we also had the creative communications at the same time. So in 2007, we launched a video wall, which actually at that time was pretty cutting edge, less so now, but still. And David Cameron did sign up to it and said he would be the greenest government ever. Afraid that didn't quite work out, but anyway. So those are a few of my big campaigns. And I'd like to the last point is around riding the wave. One of the most important things about campaigning, and again I started, is that people focus a lot on the preparation and the launch event. It's always about the launch event. Get out of the door, get out of the door. Phew, we can go and have a drink now. Actually, it's the post-launch event that's the most important. And it's around thinking, how can you make it work again? How can you give it a new life? How can you adapt it to what's going on in the real world? And I'm sure many of you have heard of change.org, but they're an organisation, they're very strong in the UK, they recently launched in Germany, massive in the States. They're really interesting. They're a fantastic group of campaigners. They're actually a profit-making organisation. But anyway, they're really good at what I would call riding the wave. And this was a campaign they ran around most of our banknotes in the UK. This might sound a bit peripheral, but have got men on them. And again, the feminist movement said, if we're going to have new banknotes, we'd like to have a famous woman on there. So they started to do it, and it really picked up. And they pushed it into loads of different ways. And actually, it just became a really symbolically national campaign because they were constantly looking at the media and making sure that it was inserted into that. We did this at One as well. When the lights went out at the Super Bowl, very quickly we retweeted our blog on electrifying Africa and how Africa quite often has to have the lights go out because of all the power cuts. And it's certainly got a lot more retweets than it did the first time around. But it's that quick, riding the wave, making sure you're there. So I think in conclusion, campaigns need attention to succeed. But most of all, that attention needs to be pointed towards those who can make a difference, including those within their sphere of influence. And people have different words for this, whether it's satellites or influence, but making sure that you're mapping the key person, people, and those surrounding them. You need to have tight and coordinated messaging. That's hugely important. And you need to create the perception that the campaign is much bigger than maybe it might be, or which you have budget for. You need to think out of the box, react to what's going on in the outside world, and most of all, have fun. That's it.